Lisa Park was drinking her third cup of coffee when the impossible happened. She had been working the night shift at the Deep Space Monitoring Station in Nevada for 5 years and had never heard anything more interesting than distant radio waves from dying stars. The large room was filled with computers and screens that constantly scanned space for any unusual signals. Most nights were quiet and boring, which was exactly how Lisa preferred it. She enjoyed the peaceful work and the chance to listen to music while monitoring the equipment. But at exactly 3:15 in the morning, everything changed when her main computer started beeping urgently. "What the hell?" Lisa muttered while quickly moving to check the source of the alarm. Her screen was showing an incoming transmission unlike anything she had ever seen before. The signal was clearly artificial and was coming from a star system nearly 50 light-years away. Lisa's hands shook as she began recording the transmission and running it through their analysis programs. The message was in a language she had never heard, but somehow the computer was already starting to translate parts of it. What she heard made her blood run cold. The voice was desperate and filled with fear. It spoke of massive ships attacking their colony and weapons destroying their defenses. The aliens were begging for help from anyone who could receive their message. They said their people were dying and they had nowhere left to run. "Oh my God," Lisa whispered while grabbing her phone to call her supervisor. "This is really happening." Within 20 minutes, the small monitoring station was filled with military personnel and government officials. Admiral Jake Morrison arrived by helicopter along with several other high-ranking officers. Lisa had never seen so many important people in one place, and she felt overwhelmed by all the attention. "Play the message again," Admiral Morrison commanded, while studying the computer screens. His weathered face was grim as he listened to the alien distress call for the third time. "How certain are we that this is genuine?" asked Colonel Steve Hayes, who was standing nearby with his arms crossed. "The signal characteristics are unlike anything we have ever detected from natural sources," replied Dr. Amy Foster, who had been analyzing the data. "This was definitely sent by an intelligent species using technology we do not fully understand." Admiral Morrison turned to face the assembled group. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are witnessing the first confirmed contact with an alien civilization, and they are asking for our help. The question is, what can we possibly do about it?" "Sir, with respect, what could we do even if we wanted to help?" Colonel Hayes asked. "We do not have ships that can travel to other star systems. Our fastest rockets would take thousands of years to reach them." Dr. Foster cleared her throat nervously before speaking. "Actually, Colonel, that might not be entirely true." Everyone in the room turned to look at her with surprise. The young scientist had been working on theoretical physics projects for the military, but had never mentioned anything about faster-than-light travel. "What are you talking about, Amy?" Admiral Morrison asked with growing interest. "For the past 3 years, my team has been secretly developing an experimental jump drive based on theoretical models," Dr. Foster explained while pulling up files on her laptop. "We have been testing it on unmanned probes and have achieved some promising results." "Are you saying we actually have faster-than-light technology?" Colonel Hayes asked with disbelief. "Sort of," Dr. Foster replied carefully. "The technology works, but it is extremely dangerous and unpredictable. We have lost several test vehicles, and we are not sure it would be safe for human crews." Admiral Morrison studied the technical data on her screen. "How long would it take to reach this alien system?" "If everything worked perfectly, about 2 weeks," Dr. Foster answered. "But, sir, I must emphasize that this technology has never been tested with people aboard. The chances of success are probably less than 50%. The room fell silent as everyone considered the implications. They had the means to possibly help the aliens, but it would require risking human lives on unproven technology. The moral weight of the decision was enormous. "We have to try," said a voice from the back of the room. Everyone turned to see Captain Ben Rogers stepping forward. "These beings are crying out for help, and we have the ability to respond. How can we just ignore their pleas? Captain Rogers, this would essentially be a suicide mission," Colonel Hayes pointed out. "We would be asking volunteers to risk their lives for complete strangers we have never even met." "Then we ask for volunteers," Captain Rogers replied firmly. "I guarantee you will have more people willing to go than you have ships to carry them." Admiral Morrison looked around the room at the faces of his officers and civilians. "Dr. Foster, how many ships could you outfit with this jump drive technology?" "We have 3 experimental vessels that could be ready within a week," she answered. "They are small, but they could carry crews of about 20 people each, along with whatever weapons and supplies we can fit." "What kind of weapons are we talking about?" asked Major Kate Nelson, who had been quiet until now. "Our most advanced plasma weapons and nuclear missiles," Admiral Morrison replied. "Against an unknown enemy, it is impossible to know if they will be effective, but they are the best we have." Captain Rogers stepped closer to the group. "Sir, if you approve this mission, I would like to volunteer to lead it. I have experience with experimental aircraft, and I understand the risks involved." "Ben, this is not like testing a new fighter jet," Admiral Morrison said seriously. "If something goes wrong out there, we cannot send a rescue team. You and your crews would be completely on your own." "I understand, sir," Captain Rogers replied without hesitation. "But these aliens trusted us enough to send their distress call to our world. The least we can do is try to help them." Dr. Foster was all ready, making calculations on her computer. "If we start modifications immediately, we could have the ships ready in 6 days. But, Admiral, I need to stress again that this technology is not reliable. We could lose all 3 ships before they even reach the alien system." "What do we tell the public about this?" Colonel Hayes asked. "This kind of mission cannot be kept secret for long." "We tell them the truth," Admiral Morrison decided. "Humanity has received its first message from an alien civilization, and we are going to help them. If we succeed, it will be the greatest moment in human history. If we fail, at least we will have tried to do the right thing." Over the next several hours, plans were made and preparations began. Word spread quickly through military channels, and volunteers started arriving at the base. Just as Captain Rogers had predicted, there were far more people willing to risk their lives than there were positions available. The 3 ships were named Liberty, Defiance, and Courage. Each would carry a crew of the best pilots, engineers, and soldiers humanity could provide. They would be armed with everything Earth could spare and supplied for a long journey into the unknown. As news of the mission reached the public, the response was overwhelming. People around the world watched in amazement as their species prepared for its first interstellar rescue mission. Nobody knew if the ships would succeed, but everyone understood that humanity was about to take its first steps toward becoming part of a larger galactic community. What none of them realized was that they were racing toward a joke that was about to become deadly serious. The morning sun cast long shadows across the crystal spires of Zelthara Prime as Vexhall made his way to the communications center. His pale blue skin caught the light as he walked through the colony's main plaza, where other Cathani were already starting their daily routines. The mining colony had been peaceful for decades, and Vexhall often wondered if his job as administrator was becoming too boring. He entered the gleaming white building that housed their most advanced technology and found Zindar already at his station. The younger Cathani was hunched over a panel covered in blinking lights and strange symbols. His long fingers danced across the controls as he monitored signals from across the galaxy. "Anything interesting today?" Vex Hal asked as he settled into his chair nearby. Zindar's large eyes brightened with excitement. "Actually, yes, sir. I picked up some unusual transmissions from a system about 50 light-years away. The signals are very primitive, but they seem to be coming from a species that calls itself human." Vex Hal leaned forward with interest. New species were always fascinating, especially ones that were just beginning to send signals into space. "What kind of transmissions are they sending?" "Entertainment broadcast, mostly," Zindar replied while adjusting his equipment. "They seem to enjoy watching moving pictures with sound. Some of their shows are quite amusing, actually. They tell stories about creatures that do not exist, and people who can perform impossible tasks." The administrator chuckled. "Sounds like they have good imaginations, at least. Are they aware that other intelligent life exists?" "I do not think so," Zindar said while pulling up more data on his screen. "Their transmissions suggest they are still wondering if they are alone in the universe. They send signals hoping someone will answer, but they seem doubtful anyone actually will." This gave Vex Hal an idea that made him smile widely. The Cathani were famous throughout their region of the galaxy for their elaborate pranks and jokes. Their culture valued humor above almost everything else, and they took great pride in creating harmless but memorable tricks. Other species had learned to expect surprises when dealing with the Cathani, though they were always good-natured about it. "You know, Zindar, this could be an excellent opportunity for some fun," Vex Hal said with a mischievous grin. His assistant looked up from the controls with curiosity. "What do you mean, sir?" "Well, think about it," Vex Hal explained while standing up and pacing around the room. "Here we have a species that is desperately hoping to make contact with aliens. They probably dream about receiving messages from space every single day. What if we gave them exactly what they wanted, but in a way they would never expect?" Zindar's eyes grew even larger as he began to understand what his superior was suggesting. "You want to send them a fake message?" "Not just any fake message," Vexahal said while his excitement grew. "We could create the most dramatic distress signal imaginable, make it sound like we are under attack and desperately need their help. Can you imagine their reaction when they realize aliens are real and asking for their assistance?" The young communications officer began laughing at the idea. "That would certainly surprise them. But, sir, what could they possibly do to help anyone? They have not even left their own solar system yet." "Exactly," Vexhal replied while clapping his hands together. "That is what makes it such a perfect prank. They will want to help, but they will have no way to actually do anything about it. They will probably spend days arguing about how to respond and what it all means." Zindar was already starting to work on his equipment again. "I could create a very convincing distress signal. We have recordings of real battles from our historical archives. I could mix those with some dramatic dialogue and make it sound completely authentic." "Perfect," Vexhal said while rubbing his hands together with glee. "Make sure to mention that we are being attacked by the Magthul Empire. Everyone in this part of the galaxy knows how terrifying they are supposed to be." "The Magthul," Zindar repeated with a shudder. "Even mentioning their name makes me nervous. Are you sure we should use them in our joke?" Vexhal waved away his assistant's concerns. "The Magthul have not been seen in this sector for over 100 years. Most people think they are just legends now. It will make our distress signal sound more dramatic and urgent." Zindar began working on creating the fake message while Vexhal watched over his shoulder. The young Kethani was very skilled with their communication systems, and he quickly assembled various sound effects and dialogue into a convincing emergency broadcast. "How does this sound, sir?" Zindar asked before playing his creation. The speakers, filled with the sounds of explosions and weapons fire. A desperate voice could be heard above the chaos calling for help from anyone who could receive their transmission. The voice explained that Zelthara Prime was under attack by a massive Magthul fleet, and their defenses were failing. They begged for immediate military assistance from any species that could provide it. "Excellent work," Vexhall said while applauding his assistant's efforts. "That sounds completely real. I almost believe we are actually under attack myself." "Thank you, sir," Zindar replied with pride. "Should I send it toward the human system now?" "Yes, but make sure to route it through several relay stations first," Vexhall instructed. "We want it to seem like it came from very far away and took a long time to reach them." Zindar's fingers flew over his controls as he prepared to transmit their fake distress signal across the vast distances of space. "The message is ready, sir. It should reach the human system in about 6 hours." "Wonderful," Vexahal said while settling back into his chair to wait. "Now we just sit back and monitor their communications to see how they react. This should provide us with entertainment for days." Neither of the Kethani had any idea that their harmless prank was about to set in motion events that would change the course of galactic history. They simply wanted to have some fun with a newly discovered species and see how humans would respond to proof that aliens existed. As the fake distress signal began its journey through space toward Earth, both Vexhal and Zindar were already planning how they would share the story with other Kethani colonies. They expected the humans to either ignore the message completely or respond with confusion and fear. What they did not expect was that humanity would take their joke seriously and actually try to help complete strangers across impossible distances of space. Vexhal was enjoying a quiet lunch in the colony's main cafeteria when the alarm started screaming. The peaceful atmosphere of Zelthara Prime was shattered as emergency sirens wailed across the crystal spires and gleaming buildings. Kethani, all around him, dropped their meals and looked around in confusion and growing fear. "What is happening?" asked Dinara, who was sitting at the table next to him. Her pale blue skin had turned even lighter with worry. Before Vexhal could answer, his communicator started buzzing urgently. He quickly activated the device and heard Zindar's panicked voice coming through the speaker. "Sir, you need to get to the communications center immediately," Zindar said breathlessly. "We have a massive problem. The long-range sensors are detecting ships approaching our system." Vexhall felt his stomach drop. "What kind of ships?" "Unknown configuration, sir. But they are huge," Zindar replied. "At least 30 vessels, and they are moving fast. They will be here within hours." The administrator quickly left his lunch and ran through the colony's streets toward the communications building. Other Kethani were also running in various directions as the emergency protocols activated. Children were being gathered and taken to the underground shelters while adults tried to figure out what was threatening their peaceful world. When Vexhal burst into the communications center, he found Zindar frantically working at multiple stations at once. The young Kethani's fingers were flying over controls as he tried to gather more information about the approaching threat. "Show me what you have found," Vexhal ordered while looking at the main display screen. The image that appeared made both of them freeze in terror. The long-range sensors showed a fleet of dark angular ships, unlike anything either of them had ever seen. They were massive and covered in weapon ports and armor plating. Even from a great distance, they looked menacing and dangerous. "Sir, I managed to intercept some of their communications," Zindar said with a trembling voice. "I think these might be Magthul ships." The blood drained from Vexhal's face when he heard those words. The Magthul Empire was supposed to be a legend from the past. They were the nightmare stories that parents told their children about the monsters that lived in the dark spaces between stars. No one had seen them for over a century. "That is impossible," Vexhal whispered. "The Magthul disappeared long ago. Everyone knows they are just old stories now." "Sir, I am reading the energy signatures from their ships," Zindar replied while pointing at his instruments. "These match the historical records perfectly. These are definitely Magthul vessels, and they are heading straight for our colony." Vexhal realized with growing horror that their harmless prank about a Magthul attack was about to become a terrible reality. The timing was impossible to believe, but there was no denying what the sensors were showing them. "Can we contact them?" Vexhal asked desperately. "Maybe we can negotiate or find out what they want." Zindar tried several different communication channels but received no response. "They are ignoring all of our signals, sir, but I am picking up transmissions between their ships." "What are they saying?" "I can only translate parts of it, but they seem to be discussing attack plans," Zindar said while his voice grew even more frightened. "They are talking about our defensive capabilities and the best way to assault the colony." Vexhal quickly activated the colony's emergency communication system to address all residents. "Attention all citizens of Zelthara Prime. We are facing an imminent attack from an unknown hostile force. All civilians must report to the underground shelters immediately. This is not a drill." Within the communications center, both Cathani worked frantically to prepare what few defenses their mining colony possessed. Zelthara Prime had never been intended as a military outpost, and their weapons were designed mainly for asteroid mining, rather than warfare. "Sir, our defensive platforms are powering up," reported Tech Ani, who had just arrived to help with the crisis. "But we only have 6 of them, and they were never meant to fight actual warships." "How long until the enemy fleet arrives?" Vexahal asked while studying tactical displays. "Less than 2 hours at their current speed," Zindar answered. "Sir, should I try to send a distress signal to the Cathani Defense Force?" "Yes, but it will take them days to respond even if they leave immediately," Vexhal said grimly. "We are on our own until then." As the Magthul fleet drew closer, their ships became visible to the naked eye as dark spots against the stars. The colony's few defensive platforms began firing long-range weapons, but their shots had little effect against the enemy's heavy armor and shields. The first Magthul ship to enter weapons range was enormous compared to anything the Cathani had ever built. It began methodically destroying the defensive platforms with precise energy beams that cut through their hulls like paper. Within minutes, half of Zelthara Prime's defenses were floating debris. "Sir, they are launching smaller attack," Kraft Tech Ani reported with terror in her voice. "Dozens of them are heading toward the colony." Vexhal watched helplessly as enemy fighters streaked toward their buildings. The crystal spires that had stood for decades were shattered by weapons fire. Explosions bloomed across the colony as the Magthul began their systematic destruction of everything the Cathani had built. "The evacuation ships," Zindar suddenly exclaimed. "Sir, we need to get people off the planet." "Contact the spaceport immediately," Vexhal ordered. "Tell them to launch every ship they have." But it was already too late. The Magthul had anticipated this strategy, and their fighters were already attacking the spaceport. The few civilian transports that managed to launch were quickly hunted down and destroyed by the superior enemy craft. "They are jamming all of our communications," Tekani reported desperately. "I cannot reach anyone outside the system." Vexhall felt completely helpless as he watched his colony being destroyed. The Magthul were methodical and ruthless in their attack. They were not interested in capturing prisoners or taking resources. They simply wanted to eliminate every trace of Cathani presence from this world. "Sir, the main enemy fleet is moving into orbital bombardment position," Zindar said quietly. "They are preparing to destroy the underground shelters." In that moment, Vexhal realized that thousands of innocent Cathani were about to die because of his stupid joke. The fake distress signal about a Magthul attack had somehow become prophetic. The irony was cruel beyond belief. "Keep trying to break through their jamming," Vexhal ordered. "Maybe we can get one message out before the end." Zindar worked desperately at his controls while explosions grew closer to their building. "Sir, I managed to punch through for a few seconds. I am sending our real distress signal now." "Where are you sending it?" "The same place we sent our fake message," Zindar replied. "To the humans. Maybe someone out there will remember us." As the Magthul ships prepared for their final bombardment, Vexhal could only hope that somewhere across the galaxy, someone would know that the Cathani had existed and that they had tried to be a peaceful people who only wanted to share laughter with the universe. Captain Ben Rogers felt his stomach lurch as the UES Liberty dropped out of jump space at the edge of the Zelthara system. The experimental faster-than-light drive had worked better than anyone had dared hope, but the journey had been rough on both the ships and their crews. Around him, the bridge crew was quickly checking their instruments and trying to get their bearings. "Status report," Rogers called out while gripping his command chair. The jump drive technology was still so new that no one was entirely sure what to expect when they arrived at their destination. "All systems are functioning, sir," reported Lieutenant Mike Chen from the navigation station. "The other two ships made the jump successfully as well. Liberty, Defiance, and Courage are all accounted for." "Good," Rogers said while activating the main view screen. "Now, let's see what we are dealing with." What appeared on the screen made everyone on the bridge fall silent. Instead of the peaceful alien colony they had expected to find, they were looking at an active battle zone. Massive dark ships were bombarding the planet below while smaller craft hunted down fleeing civilian vessels. "My God," whispered Dr. Sandra Wells, who was serving as the mission's science officer. The distress signal was real. They really are under attack. Rogers quickly opened communication channels to the other human ships. "Defiance and Courage, this is Liberty. Are you seeing what we are seeing?" Confirmed Liberty came the voice of Commander Sarah Blake from the Defiance. "I count at least 20 large enemy vessels and numerous smaller craft." The aliens were not joking about needing help. "Orders, sir?" asked Lieutenant Commander Pete Walsh from the Courage. "Those enemy ships are huge compared to our vessels." Rogers studied the tactical display and realized that humanity's 3 small ships were vastly outnumbered and outgunned. The enemy fleet was clearly much more advanced than anything Earth had ever built. Any sane military commander would retreat and call for reinforcements. But Rogers remembered the desperate voices in the alien distress signal. Somewhere down on that planet were people who had asked for help, and Earth had answered their call. The fact that the human ships were overmatched did not change their moral obligation to try. "All ships prepare for attack," Rogers ordered. "We did not come this far just to turn around and run." "Sir, with respect, those ships could destroy us before we even get close," pointed out Lieutenant Chen. "Maybe. Rogers replied grimly. "But we are going to make them work for it. Set course for the enemy fleet and charge all weapons." The three human ships accelerated toward the battle zone, while their crews prepared for what would likely be their final mission. Rogers knew the odds were hopeless, but he also knew that running away was not an option. These aliens had trusted humanity enough to ask for their help, and Earth's children would not let them down. "Enemy ships are detecting our approach," reported the sensor officer. "Some of their smaller craft are breaking off to intercept us." "Perfect," Rogers said with a fierce smile. "Pete, I want you to target their fighters with the plasma torpedoes. Sarah, take the Defiance around their left flank and hit them with everything you have." The human ships split up and began their attack on the much larger enemy force. The Magthul commanders were initially confused by the appearance of three tiny unknown vessels, but they quickly moved to swat what they assumed would be a minor annoyance. What they had not expected was humanity's complete disregard for conventional tactics and self-preservation. Lieutenant Commander Walsh fired his experimental plasma torpedoes at point-blank range, while flying his ship through the enemy formation in maneuvers that no sane pilot would attempt. Commander Blake brought the Defiance in so close to a Magthul cruiser that the two ships were almost touching. She unleashed every weapon her ship carried directly into the enemy's hull before spinning away just seconds before return fire would have destroyed her. "These creatures fight like madmen," growled war leader Graktos from his flagship's bridge. "What species attacks a superior force without any regard for their own survival?" "Unknown, sir," replied his tactical officer. "Their ships are primitive, but their crews seem to have no fear of death." The human attacks were causing real damage to the Magthul fleet, despite the size difference. Rogers realized that their enemies had never faced opponents who were willing to sacrifice everything in order to protect strangers. The Magthul were used to dealing with species that would surrender or flee when faced with overwhelming odds. "Sir, the enemy flagship is turning toward us," reported Lieutenant Chen. "I think we have their attention now." "Good," Rogers replied while watching the massive Magthul vessel begin to target his ship. "All power to forward weapons. We are going to ram that thing." "Captain, are you insane?" Dr. Wells shouted from her station. "That ship is 10 times our size," "which is exactly why they will not expect us to try it," Rogers explained while plotting an intercept course. "Pete, Sarah, this is Ben. I am going to ram the flagship. Use the confusion to hit their command ships." "Ben, no," came Commander Blake's voice over the radio. "There has to be another way." "Not this time, Sarah," Rogers replied calmly. "Someone has to break their formation, and this is our best shot. Tell Earth that we tried to do the right thing." The Liberty accelerated directly toward the Magthul flagship, while every weapon on both ships fired at maximum power. Rogers could see the enemy, bridge through his view screen as the distance closed rapidly. The alien commanders looked shocked that anyone would attempt such a desperate maneuver. At the last second, Rogers ordered his crew to overload the experimental jump drive. "If we are going to die, let's take as many of them with us as possible." The collision between the Liberty and the Magthul flagship created a massive explosion that lit up space for thousands of kilometers. The overloaded jump drive tore a hole in reality itself and created gravitational distortions that pulled several nearby enemy ships into the expanding energy field. War leader Graktos found himself thrown across his bridge as his flagship was, crippled by the human kamikaze attack. Half of his fleet was either destroyed or damaged beyond repair. The surviving ships were scattered and confused by the ferocity of the human assault. "Retreat," Graktos ordered, while struggling to his feet. These creatures are insane. We cannot fight enemies who welcome death in battle. The remaining Magthul ships began withdrawing from the system, while the two surviving human vessels continued their attacks. Commander Blake and Lieutenant Commander Walsh pressed their advantage even though their ships were severely damaged and their crews were exhausted. "Sarah, this is Pete," Walsh called over the radio. "Are you seeing this? The big ships are running away." "I see it, Pete," Blake replied with amazement in her voice. "Ben actually did it. He broke their formation and they are retreating. Down on the planet's surface." The surviving Kethani emerged from their shelters to see the enemy fleet fleeing toward deep space. In the communications center, Vexhal and Zindar stared at their screens in disbelief as they watched three tiny human ships drive away a force that had seemed unstoppable. "Sir," Zindar said quietly, "I am receiving a transmission from one of the human vessels. They are asking if we need medical assistance." Vexhal felt tears running down his face as he realized that these strange aliens from across the galaxy had actually kept their promise to help. They had traveled impossible distances and risked everything to save people they had never met. "Tell them yes," Vexhal whispered. "Tell them we need all the help they can give." 3 days after the battle, Commander Sarah Blake stood in the ruins of what had once been Zelthera Prime's main plaza. The crystal spires that had gleamed in the sunlight were now broken and scattered across the ground. Smoke still rose from damaged buildings while rescue teams searched for survivors. Her ship, the Defiance, was badly damaged but still functional. Lieutenant Commander Pete Walsh and his crew from the Courage were helping coordinate the rescue efforts while makeshift medical stations treated both human and Kethani wounded. The cost of their victory had been high, but they had saved thousands of innocent lives. Commander Blake called Dr. Sandra Wells, who had survived the destruction of the Liberty along with several other crew members. "The alien administrator wants to speak with you." Blake looked up from the medical supplies she was organizing. "Is he the one in charge here?" "I think so," Wells replied. "His name is Vexahal, and he seems very upset about something. He keeps asking to speak with whoever is in command of our forces." Blake followed the doctor through the temporary shelters that had been set up for displaced colonists. The Kethani were a peaceful-looking people with pale blue skin and large, expressive eyes. Many of them stared at the humans with a mixture of gratitude and amazement as they walked past. They found Vexahal sitting alone near the damaged communications building with his head in his hands. The alien administrator looked up when they approached, and Blake could see that he had been crying. His large eyes were filled with guilt and sorrow. "You are the human commander?" Vexhal asked in heavily accented English. "I am Commander Blake of the Earth vessel Defiance," she replied while sitting down across from him. "I understand you wanted to speak with me." Vexhal was quiet for a long moment before he began talking. "Commander, I must tell you something that will make you hate me. The original distress signal that brought you here was not real. It was a joke that I created with my assistant." Blake felt confused by his words. "What do you mean it was not real?" "We detected your species' radio transmissions and thought it would be amusing to send you a fake emergency message," Vexhal explained with shame in his voice. "We never expected anyone to actually try to help. We thought you would just be confused or frightened by proof that aliens existed." The human commander stared at him in shock as she tried to process what he was telling her. "You are saying that you sent us a prank message?" "Yes," Vexhal replied, while tears ran down his blue cheeks. "We made up the story about being attacked by the Magthul Empire. It was supposed to be funny." But then the real Magthul actually came and everything went wrong. Blake was quiet for several minutes while she thought about what this meant. Captain, Rogers and dozens of other humans had died responding to what started as a practical joke. She felt anger rising in her chest, but then she looked around at the destroyed colony and injured civilians. The attack that we responded to was real, Blake finally said. People were actually dying and needed help. That is what matters. But your captain and his crew died because of my stupid joke, Vex Howell said desperately. If I had never sent that message, none of this would have happened? Maybe, Blake replied thoughtfully. But if you had not sent that message, we would never have known that you existed. When the real attack came, there would have been no one to help you. Your entire colony would have been destroyed. Vex Howell looked at her with surprise. You do not hate me for what I did. I am not happy about being lied to, Blake admitted. But the fact remains that we saved lives here. Captain Rogers knew the risks when he volunteered for this mission. He would not want his sacrifice to be meaningless. Over. The following days, the story of what had really happened spread among both the human and Kethani survivors. Some people were angry about the deception, but most agreed with Commander Blake that the original motivation did not change the outcome. Zindar approached Blake one morning while she was checking on repairs to her ship. The young Kethani looked nervous, but determined to speak with her. Commander, I was the one who actually created the fake message, he said quietly. If you want to blame someone, it should be me, not Administrator Vex Howell. Blake studied the alien's earnest face. How